Hello, this is Keith Scott. I'm the author of a book about Rocky and Bullwinkle called The Moose That Roared. And I'm putting my Looney Tunes history cap on today and talking about this cartoon, Farm Frolics. And right there you're hearing the Paul Taylor chorus. They did many, many Looney Tunes. They were always contracted by the musical directors Carl Stalling and Milt Franklin. Here's a nice little wipe, a nice old movie device. Nice silhouette landscape.
The typical American farm presents many interesting sights.
And here we hear the familiar voice, heard in many Looney Tunes as well, of Robert C. Bruce, radio announcer at KFWB, the radio station owned by Warner Brothers. Now here comes one of the very familiar spot gag puns, the horse is trotting, of course. Nice realistic horse animation. Here's the gallop, and here comes the pun, folks, for those of you with long memories. Now do a canter. Eddie Cantor, entertainer, big-time entertainer of the day, and that voice is a freelance entertainer named Cliff Nazaro who did crooning impressions, Bing Crosby and Eddie Cantor.
Here we find the farmer's faithful old watchdog.
Here's a good sample of a dog gag.
No longer very active. He still does a few little odd jobs around the house. One of his chores is to...
Very realistic-looking animals in this cartoon, and of course they had to be slightly realistic for the puns to work in these spot gag cartoons. I'm going to deviate for a minute and discuss the fact that when Tex Avery left the Warner Brothers studio eventually for MGM, his unit was inherited by Bob Clampett, who used to do the black and white Porky Pigs in what was known as the Ray Katz unit. Clampett had been ambitious to do the colour Merry Melodies because they were a more prestigious series. And there's one of Mel's dumb voices, of course, but there's elements of Bob Clampett in this. The comic strip of Dick Tracy reoccurred in the Great Piggy Bank Robbery, of course.
A group of cute little piggies playing in the mud. Well, what are they?
Now, here's a running gag, and this is why I feel that this is a project that Tex Avery kind of had half completed and that Bob Clampett took over. There's a lot of Tex Avery in this and a little bit of Clampett, especially with this set up the gag style that Avery did in so many of his spot gag cartoons.
What's this? A weasel, the ruthless thief of the barnyard, watching his chance to sneak in and steal.
Even the weasel looks a little bit like the old weasel from The Sneezing Weasel, one of Tex's efforts. And this is very reminiscent of some of the other spot gag cartoons like Cross Country Detours. The timing is exactly the same. It's almost like a Tex Avery storyboard was left for Clampett to finish up. And here comes Mel Blanc.
Don't ever do that!
With that giggly voice that he did, which was actually sped up, was the first voice he used for Daffy Duck, strangely enough, until Daffy was refined.
In the nearby trees, we find many species of bird life.
These backgrounds almost look like Johnny Johnson was still there at the studio after Tex left, although eventually I think he went over to MGM and rejoined Tex. This is some nice camera work by Johnny Burton's department. And here's another pun. Who's
your hootie?
Who's your hootie? That's an expression that the trumpet-playing comedian Jerry Colonna did every week on the Bob Hope radio show. So many of the gags in these cartoons were so topical of their time. It's almost like we need every cartoon with a commentary explaining all of the radio gags so that future generations will understand what they're about because they're so obscure these days. There's FHA, the Federal Housing Administration. And that, I suspect, is Bob Clampett doing his little falsetto voice. Like Hitchcock, he often appeared in a tiny voice in many of his cartoons.
Here we see one of the most...
He's an odd-looking character. Almost a Dumbo version of a mouse.
Tell me, little fellow, what seems
Love
to be
this,
troubling you?
talking back and forth to the character.
I don't know, Doc.
I don't know, Doc. See, the Tex Avery influence is all over this cartoon, even though Clampett gets supervising credit. Maybe the fact that it's been replaced all these years with a blue ribbon title. Maybe Tex really has got the credit on this, although all the references say Bob Clampett did this. It's so much like Tex had never left.
Opening comes a female of the species. If you listen very closely, you can hear her calling to her young.
Here's another radio joke. Henry. Henry Aldrich's radio show always opened with Coming Mother. That Coming Mother was done by a young actor that Clampett used called Kent Rogers. He'd already been used by Tex Avery in that great Hollywood Steps Out. He was a young mimic, and he did all the movie star voices.
Say, piggies, why don't you go off and play?
Here's a running gag again with the little pigs, just waiting for that clock, and we'll see why at the end.
Here is one of the strangest friendships that has ever been known. Natural enemies, yet
Robert
living-
Bruce, who does such a grandiloquent narration on these cartoons, was a graduate in speech from the University of Minnesota, made his way west and ended up at the radio station Warner Brothers owned on the lot on Sunset Boulevard called KFWB for Warner Brothers. He did a lot of the cartoons, most of them, and in fact was better than whoever else did them because he was a trained actor as well. So he not only was like a stentorian narrator, but when he needed to change his emotion, he could. And he was just perfect for these cartoons where Mel would suddenly scream like that. And then we'd go back to the very serious, almost mock pompous narration in these spot gag cartoons. And we're just about to come to our running gag, and we'll see why we've kept coming back to these little piglets. And as the clock strikes, we hear Mel doing one of his scream voices, and they're all racing towards their long-suffering mother, as we will discover, who gives a double take here. Uh-oh, here we go again. I love that last little pig doing the... Great. And a quick cut to the voice of a very funny radio actress named Sarah Berner, who's imitating Zazu Pitts, movie comedian of the 30s. And... that's all, folks. Thank you.